Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, the regulatory landscape, and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining us, we have Alex Pollak, head of Nordics at 21Shares, Hector McNeil, founder and co-CEO of HANetf, and Townsend Lansing, head of product at CoinShares. We're here to discuss the fast-changing world of crypto, how the ETP market is evolving, the growing appetite from both retail and institutional investors, and the impact of regulations. We'll hear how these three innovators have embraced the shifts through their Nasdaq listings in Europe. It is great to have all of you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks. Townsend, I'm going to kick it off with you. CoinShares, it's been a pioneer in the crypto ETP space, and now you're returning with new products. What are your expectations?
Oh, we're really excited to be back. We were one of the first issuers on Nasdaq in Sweden, obviously with the XBT brand. We focused a bit more on the continental Europe market in the last couple of years, but very excited to have come back into the Nordics to launch a variety of new underlyings and to list on Nasdaq here. Really, what we expect, I think, is to expand the brand and just keep up with the success of the previous listings.
And HANetf's products, they have a unique structure, Hector. Could you elaborate on what sets them apart and why you believe they're a good fit for the Nordic market?
Yeah, it's interesting, Jill, because obviously Europe in some ways pioneered the Delta One crypto products. We were well before the US, and Townsend's firm led the charge on that. But actually we've lagged a little bit on more the derivative type products, and we brought the first leverage and short products to Europe. We got 2 times long short Bitcoin and 2 times long Ethereum, and we chose Nasdaq to be the primary listing for those as well, with the Swedish regulator as well as our primary regulator. So yeah, no, we're super excited about it because these sort of more momentum play products are great, for hedging or capital preservation. It actually leads into our past as well. We used to run a business called Boost, which was sort of the equivalent of the ProShares and Direction in Europe, and we're well versed in the short and leverage world. So super exciting to be the first in Europe to bring those leverage products. So we're just hoping that the Swedish investors are usually pretty smart, Nordic investors generally, working closely with Nordnet and Avanza to take them to the people. Really, that's the vision.
And 21Shares has recently expanded with new products offerings as well. Alex, could you walk us through what's been introduced and the reason behind these additions?
Yeah, sure. So, Jill, thanks a lot for having me on today. Good to be here. So 21Shares, we're the largest issuer of crypto ETPs in Europe, and we've always seen the Nordics as a key market for us. We actually listed our first products onto the OMX back in 2021, but this year we've decided to make a significant commitment to the Nordics and do a lot more. So actually today's a very exciting day for us for the OMX. We've listed an additional 5 products today, and that makes seven this year. So we have 10 products in total, and the idea is to bring our expertise and experience into the Nordic markets in Swedish krona, and bring value for money solutions into the market for retail investors. The products that we've invested are the typical kind of Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana solutions. But today we've listed actually some other products in there as well: Avalanche, Uniswap, and actually one that we've listed, I think, which is a first in the Nordics, is we listed a product called Bold, which is a product that combines gold and Bitcoin into one single solution. So investors who maybe hold gold but are also interested in crypto, you can now buy it as one combined product: gold and Bitcoin.
Huh, it's going to be interesting to follow. Townsend, I want to learn more about the Nordic market specifically. How are you seeing the appetite for crypto products among retail investors, and how do you expect this to evolve?
I think retail is still extremely strong. It's always been, especially in the Nordics, but not just here. I think continental Europe shows a similar trend. XBT was predominantly owned when it launched back in 2015 up to the last couple of years by retail investors. I think retail is still very much a heavy focus. We are seeing somewhat lag in the United States, but nevertheless a strong trend in institutional adoption. We're seeing that not just on continental Europe, but also here in the Nordics. And it's really exciting to engage with institutional investors as they kind of start to kind of interact with the asset class and want to know more about how they can get exposure and the best way to invest.
Alex, what's your take on this?
So the reason we've made this commitment. We want to do more in the Nordics as we see significant growth. The latest statistics from it's the Nordic Blockchain Association indicate that 10% of adults now in the Nordic region have exposure to crypto, and this is expected to increase to 30% over the next 10 years or so. This varies greatly across different Nordic markets and even segments and age cohorts. And one of the interesting things that comes out of the study from the Blockchain Association is that over the last year there's been considerable increased adoption from older age cohorts. So we're seeing broader adoption, and this is not just a trend in the Nordics. This is something we see globally. Obviously, we see it in the US as well, and this is on the backdrop of increasing institutional presence, political support, and regulatory developments.
Hector, how are you seeing institutional adoption in the US? What's going to be the trigger or the catalyst to really see acceleration here?
Yeah, look, I think the investor base is broadening in the crypto markets generally. I mean, we had the same experience when we invented gold ETFs back in the day when nobody had gold in their portfolios at all when we first when people were lining toilets with it. They certainly weren't investing in it at the time, but it was only sort of institutionalized and opened up once you got an ETF in it. And we were 2 years ahead of GLD in Europe with that product, and Australia was another year ahead of everybody. And we're just teaching people the basics of adding 3 to 5% in your portfolio. You get that sort of diversification benefit. You get the Sharpe ratio improvements. Just giving that sort of efficient frontier portfolio theory. And I think that's exactly the journey that crypto's gone on. It was basically all the peripheral out there DeFi guys in the start, and then people have seen the benefits of it, when it's become into particularly in the ETF wrapper, which is quite, I suppose, ironic that it had to go DeFi, TradFi before it became popular. But I think it just means that it's like the power of ETFs generally is all around the democracy and the accessibility, and having the ETF wrapper to put this new asset class in, which does give correlation benefits, etc., just means it's a very powerful weapon to go forward. And obviously, these products have come into a market that's very mature now as well. It's a $15 trillion market globally, and people want that diversification. And certainly, the volumes and the AUM and the liquidities all prove that. So I just think it's just inevitable as a march, from the retail side all the way through to institutional, and we're starting to see that across the board. I don't think anybody now is saying that it's not a viable asset class that they want to look at the very least, and many people are taking that step to invest in it as well.
Yeah, I mean, the growth in a relatively young asset class is quite impressive. Townsend, what's your take on this?
Oh, I mean, the growth's been tremendous. It's really remarkable to see how quickly adoption has kind of spread throughout the continent, and also obviously helped not to a large degree by the recent developments in the United States. But we're really expecting, as Hector was saying, gold, really expecting kind of digital asset ETPs to follow a similar pattern and to keep increasing the investor interest and the types of investors who buy them.
Yeah. All right. Turning to my favorite part of the conversation, regulations. Of course, Alex, what do you see as the impact that MiCA regulation can have on the crypto ETP space?
So MiCA, no doubt, is going to have a very positive impact on the space. For those maybe for the audience who aren't aware of MiCA, it represents the EU's first comprehensive regulatory framework for crypto assets. It's a really big deal because it introduces clear licensing rules, operational standard, and custody rules, and it's those kind of standards that will hopefully give investors confidence that crypto ETFs offer a safe and secure way into the space. And it brings greater investor protection into the space as well. And on the operational side, I think what's really interesting is that firms must now comply also with certain governance standards. So I think MiCA represents a step in the right direction. I think for investors who were maybe on the fence before, the fact that there are now formal guidelines gives them more confidence, and it's driving that institutional adoption that Hector and Townsend were just talking about.
Yeah, Hector, I want to get your view on this as well. I'm going to assume that this is one of your triggers for continued adoption.
Yeah, look, I think in some ways regulators are trying to catch up with where the market's at to some extent, right? And we're seeing that both with MiCA and also with the FCA recently announcing that they're going to allow retail to participate in this market. And I all just boils down to me that do I want my mum trading on some dodgy crypto exchange in Turkey, or would I prefer she has a regulated product on a regulated exchange traded through a regulated broker who's responsible for suitability, right? And I just think that ultimately, the more transparent and standardized regulations are, it's really about time. So congrats to the European Union, but about time they did it, in my opinion. So, but they're just catching up, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Alex, I want to talk about something equally as important is financial literacy and making sure that the industry is advocating for education so that retail investors are making informed decisions in the crypto space.
Yeah, I mean, education, I think, is absolutely key for it. Actually, I think for all of us, for firms like HANetf and CoinShares and 21 Shares, I think it's incumbent on us to actually do more on the educational side. And from a 21 Shares perspective, education is very much in our DNA. It's very central to what we do. When the company was established 7 years ago, the founder said, what's really important here is that we actually commit ourselves not only to bringing products to market, but educating investors as well. And so we spend a lot of time on this. We have our own in-house team who spends time writing reports, doing webinars, analyst reports, weekly newsletters. And what's great about our research team is that it's made up of experts from both the traditional finance world and also the crypto world. So we kind of bridge that gap together. They're very good at kind of articulating what crypto is to a non-crypto native audience, which is really important when you're starting to bring people on the crypto journey. So it's absolutely important, and we need to do a lot more of it if we're going to continue to see that regulatory or that institutional adoption.
And Townsend, what are your thoughts around this, and how do you see your role?
Yeah, so I mean, I think Alex is exactly right. I think it's pretty much in all the DNA of the firms to focus a lot on education, not just for institutional investors, but also for retail. I think, as Hector's mentioning, I also worked with him on the gold products. We spend an enormous amount of time kind of helping investors not only understand the underlying, but also the product structure. So it's something that European ETP issuers have really long focused on. It's essential. I think, in a lot of ways, the reality is in terms of the type of investor who adopts these products, education is less necessary, I think, for the pure crypto crowd. They're already directly invested, but for the so-called TradFi investors, the ones who are used to holding through, MiFID regulated brokers and used to holding traditional securities, there's a lot of education necessary. And I think ETP firms have really been at the forefront of that. Whereas the direct-to-crypto firms really have a targeted audience that, might be pure crypto players, but we really, all three of us, I think all the firms on this call, have really focused a lot on bringing crypto to the more traditional crowd.
Yeah.
And just to jump in there, Jill, I think that, just generally what I always say to my team, and, I've set up 4 ETF businesses and been involved in issuing nearly 8% of every ETF on the planet. And I always say that, I'm going to be dead and buried before we stop talking about the ETF 101 story. And I always say to my guys, just because you've heard it 1,000 times, don't think everybody else on this side of the table has. And even in the US, right, there's still, the vast majority of the market doesn't know what an ETF is, right? Or they might say it's an EFT or whatever, get all confused about it. So, whether it's crypto, whether it's other underlyings, we constantly have to be talking both about the structure, the benefits of it, how it works, and also the underlying asset classes. So that just doesn't go away. It's always going to be there.
Yeah, and Hector, I love that you brought that up. Understanding who your audience is and how to get that buy-in is not even key just to the crypto space, but I think it's great advice for any industry that you're in. And as we wrap up here, Hector, I want to get all of your outlooks. I'm going to start with you. What do you see as the next big thing in crypto ETPs? Is it a broader variety of single coins, acceleration in indexes?
Yeah. So I think you're probably going to see, and I would say this because we've listed one this week, but I think it's going to be covered calls. I think that's going to be structured outcome is going to be the big thing. Obviously, you've had it huge in the US. People like, we just cross-listed MSTY, the yield max products this week. I've never had so much retail interest in any products in my whole career on this product, and I think that's going to go from strength to strength. And I actually think there'll be a slow burn, but I think ultimately there'll be a great way for institutional investors will be indices. I think we don't have one of those, but I think that will be a great way. So it's going to be very similar to the commodity market where you had, fairly standard sort of market cap type weighted indices, and then you'll get more the smart beta products coming down the lane. But I think from an asset allocation perspective, having a smart beta index makes a lot of sense for investors.
And Alex, how do you see the space evolving?
I think we're going to see a lot more development in the basket space. So Obviously kind of the main focus and where the assets have gone over the last few years, Bitcoin's obviously been very, very popular. Solana's actually been very popular. We've seen kind of, Ripple come up as well. But I think, I can see this evolving in the same way as the ETF industry, where as we see more and more people getting into the space, and who don't really know that much about the different coins and maybe want exposures to a little bit of everything, I think that's when the baskets will be very popular. So I think the baskets will do very well in the years ahead.
And wrap it up for us, Townsend. How do you see it
Yeah,
evolving?
I think, I mean, in the short to medium term, we're going to see a lot of the barriers accelerate in the fall of the barriers accelerate. You're seeing a lot of exchanges, Nasdaq included, opening up more and more to additional crypto assets. You're starting to see harmonization of the type of crypto assets that are eligible. And we've gone from, if you look at, Nasdaq alone to other exchanges, we've gone from just a handful being eligible to that number is increasing kind of, daily. I also think, we're also seeing from a regulatory perspective, some of the last barriers falling. Hector mentioned the UK. They've recently proposed a consultation on a ban that they consulted on a couple of years ago, which would be a real step. You're looking at potentially Italy opening up Consob and Borsa Italiana, allowing the trading. I think you're going to see a lot of those barriers fall, which is going to further accelerate adoption, not just for retail, but also institutional investors.
All right. Appreciate all of your insights. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.
Thank you.
Thank you.